I grew up in a city, and I had nothing whatsoever to do with agriculture. But for some reason, when I was a teenager, I sort of fell in love with organic farming. And I knew what I had to do. I wanted to go back to the land. So the first step was grow my hair really long. Big, bushy beard. And, it's the 60s. And so I headed out into the land. I did learn some valuable skills, how to garden and beekeeping and so on. But I also became a proponent of Saskatchewan's tiny organic farming movement. And I say tiny, it couldn't have been much more tiny. There was only one certified organic farmer in Saskatchewan in the early 70s, Alvin Sharesky of Glen Ewan. Organic farming was almost a kind of a heresy. Everything was about growing farm size larger, getting more equipment, and using lots of toxic chemicals to make our food. But I really admire these guys who were the pioneers, who kind of worked against the heresy and showed that it was possible to change. So today there's over 1,000 organic farmers certified in Saskatchewan, and they're farming over 1 million acres and growing lots of grain for the world. Organic food now is a multi-billion-dollar industry in Canada, and about 60% of people buy organic food every week, at least one product organically every week. So this is just an example of the massive change that can happen actually very rapidly to bring about a better world. All over the world, people are changing from being just consumers to being prosumers. People who just consume a lot and emit a lot of waste, and to being people who actually produce perhaps their own food, like the organic farmers, but people in the cities are producing food as well. There are about 800 million people right now involved in urban agriculture. In St. Petersburg, Russia, for example, 2.5 million people grow gardens and produce a lot of their own food. But people are doing all kinds of exciting things in terms of active transportation, things like producing their own power. So it's really exciting to see. But I want to say I'm not an optimist. There's a lot of research lately on the difference between optimism and hope. And optimism is, in a way, can be kind of a naive sense of, oh, everything's going to be okay. Everything will be fine. All we have to do is apply technologies and the world's problems will be resolved, whether that's clean coal technology or nuclear power or even solar power, organic farming, that these things will quickly solve our problems. Hope is a different thing. Hope is where you really understand the depth of the problems and you are able to yet have a faith in the ability of people to transform. So just to explain why I'm really not optimistic about the future, and yet hopeful. In my book 11, I talk about the issue of population growth. Right now, we're at about 7.3 billion people. And by the end of this century, the UN's projections are we'll go to about 11 billion, which will likely be a peak population. So we're talking about adding 4 billion more people to the planet. But already our ecological footprint, the sort of sum of all of the impacts we have on the physical environment, is about 60% beyond the Earth's biocapacity. So what the Earth can produce every year in terms of renewable resources and absorb in our waste. So at 7.3 billion, we're already 60% above capacity. Another way of looking at it is it takes 1.6 Earths to support us right now. Problem is we only have one Earth. But the thing is, we've only just begun this sort of massive program of growth. Right now, the world's gross world product is about $50 trillion in 1990 dollars. But it's going to quintuple by the end of this century to $250 trillion if the program of growth continues. And if that happens, our ecological footprint is going to grow by about 300%. In which case we would need 5 planets worth of biocapacity to support us. So obviously this is impossible. Now what we have to do is somehow, despite all this growth in population, We have to return to an ecological footprint that we had back in around 1975 when there were 4 billion people. That's the last time we used one Earth equivalent in terms of ecological footprint. So this is a big problem. How are we going to do this? How are we going to grow so much and yet decrease our impact on the world? So in my book, I talk about 15 reasons why this is possible, and I'll share some with you today. One is that it's not how many people there are, but what kind of people. And we can think of someone like Yakuba Sawadogo. He's an illiterate farmer from Burkina Faso, which is in the Sahel region, just on the south side of the Sahara Desert. So this is an area that's becoming rapidly desertified. And one of the real problems in the world is the decline of arable land. Yakuba used traditional farming methods from his culture, revamped them a little bit, and was able to restore forest cover on his farm, improving the ecological capabilities of the land, but at the same time made the land more productive and was able to increase his income. Not only that, but he started to have farm field days, brought in his neighbors, and over time in his region, they changed the microclimate so much that it started to rain more in his area because all the tree cover started to draw down rain. So experts said that this man single-handedly had more impact on conservation than all the international organizations working in the area together. So what if more people were like Yakuba? Now, what if we could mobilize these small farmers for ecological restoration? There's about 2.6 million people, over a third of the world's population, that are small farmers and their families. We're talking about farms that are 1 hectare, maybe 2 hectares in size, or perhaps even half a hectare, very small farms. But they produce about 60% of the world's food. Ratan Lal, the American soil scientist, has determined that there's something like 3.5 billion hectares of land in the world, which is more than twice the amount of land that's being used for agriculture, that are degraded or desertified. So there's a huge potential there to both solve extreme poverty and hunger and to mitigate climate change. I'll tell you why. Techniques called agroecology, which actually mimic natural systems, have been used very extensively on these small farms to do two things. One, restore ecological function, but also to improve productivity by 50 to 100%. So if small farmers were to mobilize en masse, and it would take about $50 per hectare only to make that kind of transformation. It would be an excellent investment for wealthy countries to put their money for climate change into this program, because these farmers can pull down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and put it in the soil as soil organic carbon, and also in the tree cover that's part of this agro-ecosystem. So there's a potential there for them to increase their income, solve one of the world's greatest problems, which is extreme poverty amongst the rural poor, but also to mitigate climate change. And the amount of land we're talking about is equivalent to the size of Africa. So if we could do this, it would be like adding a whole continent's biocapacity to the planet, which would help us to support 11 billion people. The thing is, can it be done? And it seems like it's an impossibility to organize people at this level, but it isn't. And I'll tell you about this project on the Loess Plateau in China. The Loess Plateau is an area about the size of France, and it is the cradle of Chinese civilization. But over the millennia, they've been growing crops there, and it gradually, the soil's been eroding. And the picture on the left shows the erosion, which is really dramatic. And on the other side, you see the people were able to reforest this area. So we're talking about a major project involving local people on a mass scale with the support of the national government, as well as support from the World Bank. So people working together, uniting to restore the ecosystem in that area very effectively. So far, they've restored an area the size of Belgium. So it shows this kind of work can be done if people unite. This leads me to my second reason for being hopeful, and that's that ideas transform landscapes, as we see in this example. Now, probably all of you have seen this image as we fly into Saskatoon, and you see the kind of checkerboard landscape below us. And this checkerboard is the product of the colonial mind. So it's really an example of how the way we think actually changes the physical world. The indigenous mind had organized an economy that did change the landscape, but not in ways that destroyed ecological function. The colonial mind came in with the intention of building an extractive economy. How efficiently can we take material out of the land, take the productivity of the land, and move it as rapidly as we can to the eastern North America and on to Europe to support the Industrial Revolution. So they used the industrial model, this grid system, so they could move their grain to railways and get it out as fast as possible. So this completely transformed the land. But the thing is, if our ideas can transform land in a negative way, can't they also transform it in a positive way? And I think they can. I'll give you one example of how this has improved an urban environment. In Seoul, Korea, people turned this kind of ugly urban landscape dominated by cars and car infrastructure and changed it into this. So interestingly, the engineer that designed the roadways later became the mayor of Seoul and ripped all the roadways out again and restored the river that was underneath them, creating this beautiful park. People loved it. They flocked into it. It reduced the temperature of the city by several degrees and increased biodiversity, created a really beautiful place for people. And interestingly, the mayor of Seoul was elected president of Korea, so it was politically successful too. Then I'll come to my third reason that I'd like to share, which is the inevitability of transformation. And this comes from the idea of panarchy, which is a theory in ecology. And this theory holds that every organized system, every ecological system moves through 4 stages. And if you look at, for example, a forest, if you've been in a young forest, it's green and fresh, and there's lots of space for species to come in and develop and grow. But as it grows, it builds up its natural capital of forest cover. If you've been in a forest with a lot of deadfall, a lot of trees laying all over the place, you know it can be hard to even move through the forest. That sets up conditions that set the forest up for the release stage. Often it's a major forest fire. It's quite catastrophic. It can be diseases. Other things that kind of reorganize the capital, release it for a reorganization. And Buzz Holling, who came up with the panarchy model, said that it applies equally to human organizations and to human civilization because we are a social ecological system. So there is this inevitability of change. And in a world such as ours, where we've built up massive amounts of capital, of our stuff, our people and our stuff, we're really setting the stage for a massive shift, which will likely be quite catastrophic. But even though that sounds terrible, it really is opening up opportunities for a new approach to life, a new culture, a new agriculture, and really the creation of a new human race. So how to prepare for catastrophic change? Well, Buckminster Fuller, the great systems thinker, talked about how difficult it is to change if we just try and butt up against the system. What we really need to do is create different models that are effective, and people, once they see them, will adopt them and bring about change. So in my book, I talk about these really exciting systems, such as the Ruhi model, the Ruhi Institute, which was developed in rural Colombia. And it's really an approach that I think could be very effective. Interestingly, given the theme of TED today, it all starts with elevating conversations. So I don't have more time, but if you want to find out more about it and all the other 12 reasons I talk about in my book, get a copy of my book. Thank you very much.